Real Estate Money and More Podcast, Episode 4.
You finally found it. Welcome to the show that helps thousands with real estate, money, and a whole lot more. Now here is our host, Shane Willis.
Well, hello, and welcome to Real Estate Money and a Whole Lot More. My name's Shane Willis, and this is the podcast for investors and entrepreneurs to get ideas and tips that can help them succeed financially and in life. It is my sincere hope that we can be a small part in helping you get to the next level. And here we are on our fourth episode of Real Estate Money and More. I want to thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to discuss the loan process, and it's really the traditional loan process. I'm not going to get into creative financing. We're going to save that for a different episode. Instead, today we're going to kind of go through the loan process and documentation that's required to get a conventional loan as of July 2014. Now, why do I put a date in there? Because I want to make sure that we document where we are in time. If I had done a different podcast, July of 2006, it would have been totally different. And I'm actually going to take you guys to a class that I taught about a year and a half ago on some of the loans that we were doing back in the day, 2004, 2005, 2006. I'm going to take you to a part of that class where we talked about documentation. But when I say we were doing, I want to give you a little background on me. For those of you who haven't heard the other episode, our first episode, I talk a little bit about where I came from, what I'm doing now. And one of the things that I used to do, or that I did for a long time, was I owned a mortgage company. I owned a correspondent lending company, which, if you know anything about the mortgage lending world, you have your full-on lenders and banks. These people lend their own money, usually collect their own money. This is the person you go to get the loan from. You wind up paying them. Some of the times, there's other times they sell those loans. But for the most part, they lend their own money. Then you have your correspondence lenders, which is few and far between nowadays. That's where I was, where I had a line of credit. Our line of credit was about $50 million, and I could close a certain pool of loans. But I 99% of the time sold those loans. So I would sell a loan, worth $100,000. I'd sell it for $99,800 or something like that. Sometimes I would sell it for $102,000 or $103,000 because of the way that the back end works. But we're not going to really get into that on this episode either. I just want to let you know where my background was. And then below your correspondent lender was your mortgage broker. They basically brokered loans through either correspondent lenders or lenders. They would come to me. I'd have brokers come to me all the time, wanting to know some of my products and if they could broker the loan. And we did have, a handful of brokers that brokered with us, but we were kind of a retail shop ourselves. So I didn't do a whole lot of brokerage out because we were doing the loans in-house. So that's kind of a little of my background. I did that for well over a decade. So I'm pretty familiar with the loan process and how it works. Now in 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, not quite sure why I didn't just say from 02 to 06, but anyways, the pendulum really swung to the ridiculous. It was literally anybody could get a mortgage. If you had halfway decent credit, and I'm really being laxed in the term decent, I could get mortgages for people who had credit scores in the high 400s. If you had a 500 credit score and you had 10% to put down, I could get you a house. And not just a home. I could get you an investment property. Or 4. Or 8. And if you had good credit, I could get you all kinds of investment properties. And that's part of what caused a lot of this trouble that we went into, is that Wall Street's appetite for mortgages, because of the revenue that the mortgage origination generates, the appetite for that revenue was insatiable. And it still is to this day. And that's one of the reasons that I thought about this today as I was going to record this. And I was kind of kicking around a few ideas of what I wanted the episode to be about. But I've seen some tweets that come out earlier. I think one came out from Wells Fargo on the 11th, how the second quarter of mortgages this year over last year dropped drastically. So I know that's affecting Wells Fargo's bottom line. I know that they're not making the origination and the processing fees that mortgages generate, which means I know that's affecting the stock market. Or that particular stock, excuse me. It's affecting Wells Fargo's stock. Now, perhaps they have other assets that can counterbalance that, but if you're Wells Fargo and you're trying to balance a juggernaut like that, a decrease in that type revenue, you're going to feel it. And it wasn't a small decrease. It was in the billions. So it kind of got me thinking, I wonder if we're going to start to see, now that the mortgage companies are seeing a decrease in that revenue, and there's a lot of talk on Congress about phasing out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as the government backing of a lot of these loans, if we're not going to see a normalcy come back to the market. Now, there's all kinds of debate about what normalcy is. But I'm here to tell you, the pendulum swang during this crisis, during this fall, way too far to the conservative side. And that's not something I'm ashamed to say. Banks in 2011, 2012 were too conservative. And I'm sure it had something to do with government oversight. Some of your big banks had to follow it because of the bailouts. So they had to follow rules that made things too conservative. Now, I am not for going back to the 2006 days where I know of shops in Central Florida that would go out and find a 19-year-old who had a 720 credit score and broker with that 19-year-old, sell that 19-year-old on how he can own 10 investment properties by the end of the month. No money down. Well, that's obviously not a bad investment, and especially for a 19-year-old, they're thinking, wow, I can get 10 properties, no money down, and they can start cash flowing for me? But there were no criteria. The criteria was, do you have a good credit score? And what these guys do, what these shops would do, was broker to 10 different lenders, and sometimes not tell the other lenders that they're brokering to 10 different lenders. So, because the lenders really didn't want all 10 showing up at one time, really a person should not buy more than one or two investment properties at a time, especially if it's their first one. You really shouldn't buy more than one if it's your first one. Get your feet wet. Understand that it's work. It's not just buy the property and then collect a check. No, it's some work. Either you've hired a manager to do it or it's some work yourself. That's one of the things that have come out of that today's lending world. You can't even count the income from an investment property when buying another one, whether it be your home or an investment property. You can't count the income from that first investment property until you've owned it for 2 years, until it shows up on your tax return for 2 years. Now, of course, there's some debate. If you bought it in December and it actually showed up that next year on your tax return, you only accepted a month's worth of rent, but it did show up for 2 years. There's obviously some debate there, and that's up to the underwriter. But I think the pendulum swung a little too safe. They really wanted the very vanilla, you need to have good money down. You need to have a really good credit score. There must not be anything wrong. It was what we called in the industry all A-paper stuff. This is the least risk. And I understand the banks wanting to mitigate their risk. They took a beating with all the short sales and the foreclosures. They took that, and I get that. But now that we're kind of coming out of that, and I'm seeing the revenue drop from mortgages or mortgage originations, I'm starting to wonder if we're not going to see that pendulum swing a little bit back towards normalcy. Now, what's normalcy? Well, what if we look at a self-employed person? Us self-employed folks, sometimes it's tough to get a loan because we make money. We make good money. Some of us don't. But for the most part, we make good money, but we also write off a whole lot of things. My accountant is very, very good. He writes off a lot. So when it comes to my net and my taxable bill, I don't show a whole lot of income there. Well, that's the only thing the banks want to go off of, is what's that taxable income. So what's wrong with having a loan product that when you're looking at income and you're documenting that income, that you document their gross or maybe their bank statements? That was a popular program in the early 2000s. It was called a bank statement loan. If you had a 24-month bank statement loan, they would add up all the deposits, average those out, and as long as none of the deposits were strange, meaning if you're typically depositing $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 into that account every month, and then all of a sudden in May you deposited $180 and could not justify it, well, they're going to take it out of the average. They're probably going to take it out of the average anyways, because even if you could justify it, it's still way out of the realm of what you normally put in. So they're going to take that out. And they're going to average you up to about $7,000. Then they're going to take a certain percentage off of that because they know that's what you spend on bills with the business and yourself. Then they're going to count your debt to income ratio up. Well, that makes sense because it really is, this is how much money's coming across the table. Your traditional banks still aren't doing those. Now, I do subscribe to the Scotsman's Guide, which is a free publication. You can get both online and in the mail. Matter of fact, I'll put a link in the show notes. The Scotsman is just a magazine that comes out once a month that has a lot of the loan products. This is a loan origination or a mortgage broker magazine, if you will. I know I've written a couple of articles with them over the years. They'd asked me to write a few, and I have written some and been published with them. So I still get that. But in the back of the Scotsman's, they have a matrix for a lot of the lenders that want to advertise in the Scotsman's for brokers and wholesalers to come, buy money from them. And I was looking the last couple of months, and sure enough, I'm seeing some off-brand banks and lenders bringing back the bank statement loans. 24 months bank statement counts as your income. That makes sense to me, but I'm wondering how far this pendulum's going to swing back the other way. And really it came down to documentation. This whole fall that we had really came down to documentation. When you document a loan application, it's called a 1003 because it's a form 1003. Any of your loan officers will just call it a 1003. There's a couple of aspects of the application, and you've all seen them. We've all filled out a credit application. They want your name, they want your social, they want your date of birth, they want your place of residence for the past 2 years, and even your prior place of residence. Then they want your income. What do you make per month? Gross. Then they want your debts, any of your debts that you come out. Then they also want your assets. How much do you have? What do you got in the bank account? This all helps the bank or the lender determine the amount of risk you are. What type of risk are you? So these are the parts of the application that's how we start. That's the lending process. We start with the application. So we fill out all the application. Then we have to document. Now there's a couple of different ways to document what we've put. We're such litigious, and people would just go in there and say, yeah, I make $2 million a month. Well, if you can document it, great. If not, a little concerned about you. Now, what we saw in the past was documentation was really, really, really laxed. Now it's a little overkill, and they want everything. We just closed on our new home not 6 weeks ago, and I used my VA loan for that. And boy, the documentation, I knew going into it what I was going to have to document, so I already had the book of paperwork that I knew they wanted done. They said my file was one of the easiest they've ever closed. It's amazing when you own a mortgage company, you kind of know what the underwriter's looking for. But I knew that it was a lot more documentation than I would have had to have done even 6 years ago, even for a VA loan. Now, we fill out this application, now we have to document it. And what happens now, just what happened with my VA loan, we call that in the industry full documentation. You must document everything you just said. Now, I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to take you to a class I taught about 1.5 years ago. This class talks about the different types of documentation we used to do in 2004, 2005, 2006, in the heyday. This is what was out there. Now, we didn't do all of them. My firm didn't do all these types because some of these I just felt like were way out of the box. But this is what was available to the public. So I'm going to take you there now, and we'll come back and finish the conversation. All right, so as we were discussing, I want to talk to you now about the mortgages that we saw right before the bust. Today we're going to talk about verifications, what we saw out there. There's actually 5 mortgage types that I want to discuss, and I want to kind of count them like 5 sisters, if you will. Each sister has a different requirement to take her out, and some of them are not so good. All right, so the first sister, her name was Siva. Siva. S-I-V-A. Siva. Siva stood for Stated Income Verified Assets. So what Siva required is that when you filled out a mortgage application, you put down what you did, then you stated how much you earned. Stated. She didn't verify it. She did look to make sure it made sense. If you put down you were a cook at McDonald's and you make $100,000 a year, that's not going to work. But she did not verify your income as long as it made sense. What she did do was say, show me the money. In other words, she verified the assets. That's what the VA stands for. Stated Income Verified Assets. Okay? So you must show her the bank statements. If the loan required 6 months reserves, you better have 6 months reserves and you show it in the bank statements as liquid assets. So that's SIVA. That was one of the first loans that we seen come out during the early 2000s, late 90s. SIVA's sister, who was a little dangerous, was called SISA. Now SISA had a little bit less criteria in order to go out. What she did was she said, I want you to state the income just like her other sister, but then you can also state your assets. Now again, they're going to look to see if it makes sense. They want to see that you've been an accountant for 15 years and you've got $400,000 in the bank as a stated asset. That makes sense. Again, if you've been a cook at a fast food restaurant and you say you got $1.2 million, well, now she thinks you're lying a little too much. So she didn't really verify things, but she wanted to make sure they made sense. So on the application, you actually did put your income, but you stated it, and you did put your assets, but you stated it. None of this was verified. Okay? So that's SISA. Now we get into some of the dangerous sisters. The next sister, NEVA. This one's standards are really starting to get low. What NEVA stated, that in order to get a loan with this type of verification, we don't only want you filling out the income section. I don't want you filling it out. Just don't even put down what you do. All I want to do, like her other sister up here, is show me the money. So as long as you show that you got enough assets in order to cover the reserve requirements needed, then you might be able to go out with NEVA or get a loan via NEVA. Now, understand every one of these loans cost more. So as we go down this list, the interest rate's getting higher and higher. Okay? But she did not even want you to spell out what you did. Just leave the employment and income section blank. As long as you have a high enough credit score and you can show me the money with the verified assets, you're good. You got a loan. It gets worse. Her next sister, Nissa. Can you guess what Nissa is? No income, leave the income section blank, and state your assets. You better have a high credit score to get this one. But you basically can leave the income section blank, and you can just tell me how much you have in the bank. And we believe you, no problem. That's Wall Street greed for you right there. This is where we really started to get into trouble. Okay? So that was the fourth sister, the fourth type of loan that you could get. Now the fifth one was the absolute worst. The fifth one was called NODA. NODA. What is NODA? NODA was no doc. No documentation required. This sister basically said if you had a high enough credit score, we can go out. Or the bank said as you had a high enough credit score, no problems. We'll lend you the money on the real estate because you obviously pay your bills, right? Because your credit score is high. So you obviously pay your bills. So we don't need you to put anything in the income section. We don't need you to put anything in the asset section. We basically want you to put your name, your social security number, your address so that I can pull credit. And then if you have a high enough credit score and willing to pay usually 1.5% to 2% higher than the other rates, you don't have to prove a thing. This is where we got into a whole lot of trouble because you had the high credit score teenagers, 19, 20, 21 years old, going out and getting 5 investment properties using a no-doc loan. That spells trouble. Hopefully that audio quality is not too bad. Those wireless mics sometimes don't pick up as good as the mic I have here in the studio. But that just kind of took us back to what we could do. And that's not necessarily me advocating that that's what we should do, because I'm not. I'm not advocating that at all. I think those no-doc loans were ridiculous. I think the only place for a no-doc loan would be in the hard money arena, which is okay. There is a marketplace for that. But for hard money, you're probably looking upwards of 30, 40, 50% down. And now it really doesn't matter. Some of your hard money lenders are actually hoping that you don't pay, because then they can get a property, 50 cents on the dollar because they only lend you 50% of the value of the house. But these guys were doing 100, 105. I even seen 110% no-doc loan in 2006. That floored me. The other thing that floored me was I saw a 50-year note come in 2006. Instead of a 30-year note, it was a 50-year amortization note. It was for your properties out west that were just getting ridiculously high. Nobody could afford them on a standard 30-year note. But those are your documentations that were allowed back in the day. And even just listening to that kind of makes me chuckle some at some of the stuff that we did and we saw happen all the time. I would get no-doc loans come in all the time. And like I said, I think there's a place for them, but I don't think it's 100%. I think there's probably a place for every one of those documentation types. But again, it's not 100%. It's the loan to value versus the risk that we should be looking at. And that's what the banks literally just shut all of those down. They shut the stated income verified assets. They shut the stated income stated assets. All of them. They shut them down because it was too much risk on any of them. And like I said, again, I think if you start looking at a lower loan to value, some of those loans make sense again. But those were the documentations we could do in the past. I kind of wanted to walk you through a loan process here today. And this is a traditional loan process. What happens? So today you go in and fill out an application. you have to verify everything. So what you're going to do is you're going to sit down with a loan officer, whether that be at the bank or a mortgage company or whatever. You're going to fill out that 1003. Then they're going to ask you to verify everything. They're going to pull your credit, make sure your credit's good enough to qualify for their programs. And right now I'm seeing some VA and FHA stuff in the low 600s. 620 seems to be a common floor, 640 at a lot of places. I have seen some in the 600s. If you walk in there with a 480 credit score, forget it, you're not getting a loan. Not from your traditional financing right now. You need to go work on your credit, which we're going to have a product coming out. I think this fall is when that product's scheduled to come out, about how to work on credit, how to get credit repair. And I'm very familiar with it because, as some of you may or may not know, I had a foreclosure happen on my credit, and I had to start back from not ground zero. A foreclosure is a little below zero. And work my way all the way back up to getting a conventional loan, using my VA to get a conventional loan. So I know the process there. But we go in, we get the application done. Then they're going to ask to verify. They're going to pull the credit. They're going to ask to verify. So you're going to need to bring probably 2 months worth of bank statements, unless you're at your particular bank and they can pull it. They're going to want to see your last 2 to 3 pay stubs. They're going to want to see your last W-2, if not tax returns. And let me tell you, for all you self-employed, just go ahead and prep on 2 years tax returns, both personal and business. If you have a business and you're filing business tax returns, just go ahead and prep on bringing both of those in. And then you're going to have, then they're going to look at your credit score. So not only are they going to look at your score, but they really dive into your credit. And when I say dive in, I mean they're going to ask if they see a negative on there. What is this? Explain this. Even if it's an easy explanation, they want to document the file because it's over documentation or full documentation right now. For instance, they wanted to tell me, hey, why did you have a foreclosure? Why is there a foreclosure on your credit report? Well, my letter of explanation to them was very simple. I owned a mortgage company. Here's a paper from 2008. The economy went to beep. I'm not quite sure what I can say on a podcast and what I can't. Guess I should look that up. But anyways, we'll just go with the beep. So the economy went to crap. I lost my house. I got rid of the company. I sold the company, and was able to get out from underneath the debt of the company, but I could not maintain my house. So I lost my house. Now that was easy enough and the underwriter understood it. So at least they were making sense there. But they're going to look through any of your credit, and they're going to look to see if there's anything negative, and they're going to want an explanation for it. So a good idea going in is just go ahead and write those letters of explanation. Get a copy of your credit report. If you see something negative, just go ahead and write the letter of explanation and hand it to your loan officer. Trust me when I say this will make your life a lot easier, because if you have a full documented file in the hands of the underwriter, when they look through it, you're going to have very, very minimal steps. And steps are stipulations. We'll get there in just a second. So you take the application, then you have to document everything. You have to document your income. You better come with the bank statements. If you have retirement accounts, if you have stock accounts, if you put anything on that application, you need to document that application. So now you document what you put. Then you send it up through the loan officer to the underwriter. The loan officer is also going to go ahead and order the appraisal, because the underwriter has to not only underwrite you, but underwrite the deal. They need to underwrite the property. So a lot of banks are requiring you go ahead and pay for the appraisal up front. Just be prepared for that. So they order the appraisal. Then they also order the title work to make sure that title is good and the seller truly can sell the property to you without any encumbrances on the title. So that the lender's going to really be in first or second position, or however they're building it, and there's nothing that's going to supersede them. So this is all a risk factor based decision. These are what they do. So the appraiser goes out, and lately I have seen your government backed or even conventional loans. The appraiser has about 2 weeks to go out, evaluate the property, evaluate the solds. When they go out, they're looking at the last 3 solds in the area that are comparable. Sometimes they use 4 or 5 that are comparable to the property you're buying. And they send it back to the lender. Now, let me just make a quick note here, because some people think that the appraiser works for the buyer. That's not true. Other people think the appraiser works for the seller. That's not true. And I have seen a few people think that the appraiser works for the realtor. That's definitely not true. The appraiser works for the bank. That's who now, I know we're going to hear it already. Wait a minute. The buyer pays the appraiser's fee. Doesn't the appraiser work for the buyer? No. The appraiser works for the bank. Yes, the buyer pays the fee. That's a requirement to get a loan. But the appraiser's there to help show the bank the risk they're taking. It's also the boots on the ground, because we might have some great photos, but we're going to send the appraiser out there to show, hey, this is in working order. This is in working order. When you go to do a VA or an FHA loan, which will be different episodes, we'll talk about those 2 loans in a different episode. They actually have criteria, higher standards than a conventional loan. VA has certain criteria that must be met in order to use a VA loan, because now the Veterans Affairs is backing the loan. So the appraiser is the one that dictates all this. Now, it used to be that the mortgage broker could, or the lender could just call up their appraiser. Hey, Steve, I need this appraisal done over here. Here's the contract. Go take that happen. The problem is, back in the heyday, the mortgage lenders and the appraisers became friends. And there were some unscrupulous business activities going on. It wasn't just, hey, Steve, I need an appraisal. It was, hey, Steve, I need an appraisal, and I need it to come in at X. Well, no, that's not supposed to happen. The appraiser is supposed to be independent, and the appraiser is supposed to work for the bank. So now the mortgage person, and typically the realtors, are not even supposed to talk to the appraiser. The only time really the appraiser will call any of those parties is if they need to gain access to the property. I'll get a phone call, or the listing agent or the buyer's agent, or somebody will get a phone call from the appraiser going, how do I get in? But the appraiser goes out there, runs through the criteria, sends the appraisal back up. The title work is ordered from the title company or from the attorney's office, depending on your state. And that's sent over. So now your loan officer, or at this point it's probably your loan processor, because the loan officer's job is to explain the loan, give you your disclosures, which you must receive. There are deadlines for these disclosures. Each disclosure, it's usually 72 hours, 48 hours. You have to receive them. They have to go out to show you this is what the loan is. This is the cost involved in the loan. And let me just go ahead and make a caveat right there. Most of your lenders in today's world are over, what's the word I'm looking for? Over anticipating the cost. And here's why. If they under anticipate the cost, or if on what's called a good faith estimate, if they underestimate on that good faith estimate, they have to eat the difference unless you've been redisclosed. So, let me say that again. If they underestimate, they have to eat the difference. So what most of them have gone to doing is overestimating drastically. I'm seeing closing costs for a $100,000 loan in the $7,000 and $8,000 range, when I know it should be more like 3 or 4. But they want to make sure they're covered, because if they come in under, they're okay. And it has to be drastically different in order for them to redisclose. But if they come in under and your costs are higher, they have to either redisclose or eat the difference. So now all that's done. We've got the appraisal, we've got the loan documentation, we've got the application. Now it goes to the underwriter. And sometimes it goes to the underwriter prior to the appraisal showing up, but for the most part it goes to the underwriter at this point. The underwriter's job is to literally look through the 30, 40, 50 files they get every day and underwrite based on the guidelines and criteria of that particular lender, of that bank. Or if FHA is backing it, VA is backing it, USDA is backing it, whatever, they have to underwrite not only to the criteria of the bank, but the criteria of the program that's backing it. So they have this massive checklist. And for the most part, most of them lately have been pretty realistic. Now, there are some underwriters that I know of that I had a couple that worked for me when I owned the company that had a real God complex. And they didn't work for me very long. But most of them are pretty realistic. Now, they will ask sometimes for stupid stuff. And I use the word stupid lightly. There is a Forrest Gump thing. I use that word lightly because sometimes we feel like it's stupid stuff. I want a letter of explanation on why you were late on a credit card payment of $15 in 1982. And we go, who cares? It's 2014. I was a kid, that's why. But they might want that. Now, I'm over exaggerating there because obviously something on 1982 is probably not on your credit report anymore. But it's stuff like that we want this letter of explanation. And it might be 5 letters of explanation. I know that because I own the company and the company was footing the bill for my closing cost on my home, which I was just taking out as a great, all the accountants out there listening to this are going to kill me. I was taking it out as shareholder distribution. But the underwriter came back and said, well, we want a letter from your accountant that you taking out this shareholder distribution of, and I don't think it was much money. I want to say it's like $2,000 or something. It was really, really inexpensive. Because it was a VA loan, and VA loans literally no money down. But because I was taking $2,000 for the extra closing cost, that it would not affect or materially affect the business. That's what it was. That they wanted a letter from my accountant that the $2,000 shareholder distribution that I was taking to complete this transaction would not materially affect the business. Now, when I called him, he went, how the heck would I know? I do your taxes. But I said, he said, I get this request all the time. I understand it. I don't understand why they're asking me for it, but it's a box that has to be checked. Now, to me, that was kind of a stupid thing, but that was the only stipulation that came out of my loan because I knew what they were going to ask for to begin with. I went and I got my free credit report, and don't go to those sites that you have to sign up to get. I'll put a link to the site, to the really free one that you're allowed to get once a year. It doesn't cost you anything. I'd put a credit card in, nothing. So I had done that already, and I wrote the letter of explanations. I knew what they were looking for. I knew what was going to happen. But they came back and asked for that. Well, you just sit there and go, seriously? And you want a letter? Okay. So don't argue with them. When the loan officer comes up and asks you for stupid stuff, don't argue with them. Just, okay, here you go. Now you can get a little aggravated if they ask you for the same thing over and over and over again. Because I have seen loan officers ask for, well, I need that bank statement. Okay. Well, now when you send them the bank statement, well, I need that bank statement. Wait a minute, I've already sent you the bank statement. Now, to jump onto the loan officer side, when they ask for a bank statement, don't send them just the page that has one, has the information on it. Send them the whole bank statement, even that page that's intentionally left blank. Because it says on the bottom of every one of those bank statement page 1 of 9, page 2 of 9. Now, all of us know page 9 of 9 has nothing on it. But it is page 9 of 9, and that completes the package. And that's key to getting a loan done quicker. To make more sense is I need all 9 pages. Even the one that says this page intentionally left blank. Because at the bottom it says page 9 of 9. Another stupid request. But it happens. Okay, so now the underwriter has underwritten the file. They will come back with what they call a stip sheet. Or a stipulation sheet. This is a sheet of stipulations that must be met in order for the loan to qualify, in order for the loan to close. Now, some of them could be pre-closing and some of them could be funding. You have a pre-closing stipulation and a funding stipulation. If you have pre-closing stipulations, those stipulations must be submitted back to the loan officer, back to the underwriter. That underwriter has to sign off on them. Okay. Then we get into the closing phase. Most companies have a separate closing company. I'm just trying to show you guys a little bit about the behind the scenes of what's going on. It's not a separate closing company, forgive me. It's a separate closing office. So they have the closing department. That's the word I'm looking for. So you go to the closing department now, and they have to draw up the docs. And for those of you who have seen a mortgage doc lately, it's about 4 chapters. It's a book. Now, it's written by lawyers for lawyers. And Lord help you if you're doing a FHA or a VA loan. I had to limber up my hand when I signed it because the Department of Veterans Affairs, we all know how good they are, has a very, very long packet that you have to sign when they're backing a loan. Okay. It was one of my VA benefits, so I used it. So the closing department preps all those papers and then sends it off to the title company or attorney's office, again, depending on your state, for them to prep the final documentations. Now, the title company here, and again, attorney's offices in other states, are going to gather some information that the lender's not going to have. So when they prepare that settlement statement, which is all the credits and debits that happen in the transaction, there's going to be some things that the lender might not know about yet. Meaning, how much did it actually cost for the home inspection? How much did it actually cost for the survey? These are invoices that are sent to the title company. So the title company is going to prep the settlement statement, or what we call the HUD, because it's a HUD 1 statement. And then they're going to send it back to the lender for approval. The closing department is going to sign off on the HUD, saying, yes, that's good. Then they're going to send that sign off, yes, that's okay, back to the title company or lawyer's office and wire the funds. But they're going to wire the funds with like a code on it. It's what they call a funding number code. They're not releasing that code yet. And when you go in and close, they then have to scan and either fax or email a certain amount of documents back to the lender. So now the lender knows, hey, that you've signed for the note is one of the big ones they're looking for. They want to make sure you sign, that the seller signed the deed, that you now own the property, that you have signed the note, that you know what the terms are and that you're going to pay it back, and you have signed the mortgage, which is the instrument that creates the debt on the property. All those things have been signed, witnessed, everything else. Then they will give the title company the code to access the funds so that the title company or attorney's office can disperse the funds. Yay, congratulations, we now have a successful transaction. Now, if that seems like a whole lot of stuff, it's because it is. But I wanted to have an episode that I dedicated to people understanding kind of a small portion of what's going on behind the scenes. There are multiple people that touch a real estate transaction. And that's one of the reasons that the National Association of Realtors has all kinds of stats out there that says real estate really can drive an economy. Think about it. We talked about a loan officer. We talked about a loan processor. We talked about a loan underwriter. We talked about an appraiser. We talked about a title person. We talked about a realtor. We talked about a survey person. We talked about a home inspector. We talked about a termite inspector. That's 9 people. That's 9 jobs for one transaction. One person doing that. One transaction has 9 jobs. Real estate really can spurn the economy. But I wanted to dedicate this show so that you could get a small glimpse behind the curtain on what's going on. And one of the reasons I tell you to document everything up front and have a good, clean package up front is because imagine being that underwriter. Just for a second, I want you to imagine being that underwriter. You get 40 new files a day. You have a certain criteria that you must underwrite to. And you get some that are half-cocked. They don't really have all the documentation in. They don't really have any good explanations of why this is happening. the appraisal's not in yet. These are the loans that you now have to stipulate out because it's been put on your desk. Well, you're going to have a long list of stipulations. Now imagine being that underwriter and you get a file that when you open it up, before you've even asked for it, you have letters of explanation on why that $10 credit card statement from 1980-something was late. They see that the appraisal's already done. They see that the title work is in and it's clean. They see that you have documented every bit of your bank statements. You've given them all pages. You've given them your most recent pay stubs. Most recent. So let me reiterate, the most recent pay stubs. So if it takes 2 weeks to get the appraisal done and you get a new pay stub, get it to your loan officer. So your loan officer can put it in the file, or get it to your loan processor. So that when it hits the underwriter's desk, when they get a file like that, it's almost like relief. When I owned my mortgage company, I had 9 underwriters on staff. All they did was underwrite files all day. That was it. I even had their own little section of the building where I had a separate lock, and I would lock them in there. It sounds bad now that I say that out loud, but we would lock them in there for a couple of hours. No phone calls, no nothing, just so they can concentrate on doing this, because loan officers and people are wanting answers right now. So I had to kind of lock the world out. I guess that's a better way of putting it. I was locking the world out, not locking them in. Make sure my labor people don't call me. So they could concentrate. But imagine the relief you get when you open a file and it's all there. And you can just check the box. Check, 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 check. Now, it's much easier, and you're going to get a lot more accomplished with that underwriter, because now they're not worried about you. They know that you know what you're doing because you listen to Real Estate Money and More podcasts. That was a shameless plug. They know what you're doing. So they're going to give you less heartache. They're probably going to ask for less stupid stuff. If you can explain everything right up front, they might not even ask for much. Now check whatever boxes have to be checked that are missing. You're going to get a very small stipulation sheet to come back. And then you're going to have a successful loan. It's going to be a lot less headache. So wow, that's definitely the longest podcast I think we've ever done. I try and keep them around 30 minutes or so. But I wanted to give you a small glimpse of what's going on at the bank, how many people are touching this, and the behind the scenes of what's happening with your loan, and how you can make this transaction a lot smoother. If you have hung in here with me until now, thank you for listening to Real Estate Money and More. My name's Shane Willis, and I sincerely appreciate it. I hope you learned something, and we'll talk to you next week.